As with all planets in the solar system, Earth participates as a member in the great cosmic symphony. Each planet has its keynote in the music of the spheres, which progresses the spiral cyclic motion of consciousness. Just as our incarnation can be broken down into years, months, and days, so too the incarnation of planets have their own natural cycles, but spanning billions of years as we measure time. The whole solar system is one consciousness, which in itself is the totality of all life within its own ring-pass knot, which can be considered the boundary of its auric influence. Yet each planetary scheme within the solar system functions as its own unique system. The key to understanding the vast inner history or esoteric side of life is the science of cycles. There are many greater and lesser cycles which are found within one another. It is both the journey and the destination which expand and fulfill any given cycle.
One of the things that is involved in this consideration of the ageless wisdom and what it is that it actually says. It speaks in terms of very vast schemes of time and the cycles that occur within that. And largely the focus is on the cycle of the unfoldment of consciousness.
The law of periodicity is basically the science of cycles. So periodically these cycles recur over periods of time, they repeat, but they repeat on different turns of the evolutionary spiral. So we have cycles of the rays, we have cycles of the planets, and we of course have cycles of the zodiac. So we have many, many wheels within wheels to study in the science of cycles.
Just as the planetary logos is a microcosm of the solar logos, so too the human logos, or monad, is a microcosmic reflection of our planetary spirit. When spirit or energy gradually materializes and becomes matter, we call this involution. And when matter spiritualizes and becomes energy, we call that evolution. All life in the microcosm and macrocosm follow this universal pattern. The ebb and flow of energy is one of the primary principles of the law of vibration.
We've heard much about evolution and the whole theory of evolution, how it is presented to Western society at this time is important, but it's not the whole story. It's one arc of a two-arced process. That which ascends has to have descended before it ascended. So we have what is called involution, to wrap yourself up in matter. The spirit descends subplane after subplane, wrapping itself up in ever greater density and in encapsulation, and this is part of the emanative process. It goes all the way down to the bottom. When we've hit the mineral kingdom, the in-mineralization of the monad, the in-mineralization of the spirit, we're ready to start what we call evolution. And then we pass, as a spirit, from the mineral kingdom to the plant kingdom, from the plant kingdom to the animal kingdom, from the animal kingdom to the human, and we're still going. We're still going on our evolutionary arc. And the different stages that we must pass through are lived out on different dimensions or different planes. But that fall, that involution, is rarely expressed or discussed. But it's real, and it's the other side of the evolutionary arc. And this evolution occurs through the planes and subplanes until they are all mastered. Does it end there? It does not. Nirvana is but the beginning of the endless way. Is it endless? Not in any one universe. A universe ends. But is the way endless? Yes, it's as endless as it is beginningless. And that's a tough one to wrap your mind around.
The development of our entire Earth scheme will manifest through 7 chains. The secret doctrine calls them chains because each one is a chain of 7 globes.
Every planet in the solar system is regarded as a planetary scheme, and within that scheme exists the globes and the chains of each particular planetary scheme. And of course, all these planetary schemes within the solar system are connected to one another. So the rounds and globes and chains refer to the greater picture of evolution.
Each chain will manifest upon one of the 7 cosmic planes, manifesting first through a cycle of involution until reaching the lowest cosmic plane or density, known as the cosmic physical plane, then shifting upward on a path of evolution back to the higher cosmic planes, if you will, but coming full circle on a higher turn of the spiral. The 7 globes of each chain will also follow a path of involution and evolution within their lesser cycle, yet still stupendous when compared to human incarnations. However, the expression of life within each globe pours through 7 lesser cycles called rounds. A round is a great period of activity called by the Hindus a manvantara.
The rounds are enormous periods of time, and there are 7 rounds that correspond to each planetary incarnation or globe of the so-called planetary logos. And we are currently in the 4th round of 7 rounds at the moment. We are halfway through this globe period. Now, the rounds are the cycles of time of the various groupings of monads that cycle through the globe and chain of a particular scheme. The rounds extend for a period of 617 million years, and they are composed of 2 manvantaras, which are 308 odd million years each. And so there is a certain in-breathing and out-breathing of these manvantaras or cycles of time.
The chains and globes are by far the largest cycles of our planetary logos. To put it into perspective, one globe period lasts roughly 4.3 billion years. One globe represents a full incarnation or period of expression of our planetary logos, wherein our human spirit or monad will embark on its long journey and pass through the kingdoms of nature.
So in all kingdoms of nature, we find that there, again, is a spectrum of consciousness that moves from lower levels to much more higher levels, capable of reflecting consciousness in different ways.
To reiterate, there are 7 fundamental rays that underlie all of creation, and that those rays are rays that are the life-giving intelligence for all of life, but also all the planes of consciousness. And there's a direct correlation between the 7 rays and 7 planes. What I'd like to do now is get into the subject of life itself as it manifests on Earth, and the kingdoms of nature as being a manifestation of that process. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how each of the kingdoms of nature represent life encased in form and evolving certain characteristics that build upon each other, so that every kingdom of nature is where life is adding new attribute, new qualities, and building upon what had previously been learned.
So the mineral kingdom is much more static and expresses a certain sort of stability. The plant life starts to move toward a higher level of sentience, ability to feel. When you come to animals, there is really the development of this sentient capacity and a certain degree of this sort of choice and instinctual behavior. At the human level, then, consciousness takes on this quality of self-awareness. So the actual ability to express consciousness, not in instinctual grooves, but by matters of choice. And so this is the platform from which these sort of superhuman kingdoms develop. And these are the realm of not just free will, but a will that has been utilized to become one with a greater will.
The kingdoms of nature are not localized on Earth at all. They are found on every planet. And if we were to go into other solar systems, who knows, we may find that these great aggregations of lives at a certain stage of development, which we call a kingdom, would be found in the other systems as well. That's really what a kingdom is. It's an aggregation of monads of a certain kind who are immersed in matter of a certain degree and certain density, and they evolve together.
The monad being that pristine sort of spiritual impulse in terms of the earth and in terms of the cycles involved in the development of life on earth, it's something that projects itself into matter, so that this entire cycle of coming into matter, which is to say the mineral realm, and then actually expanding its capacity in consciousness to the sort of liberated state of beyond humanity, is something that takes place over vast periods of time. So the life moves from planet to planet within these particular sorts of rounds and chains of cycles, ultimately arriving to the point of complete self-awareness and complete liberation from its involvement in matter.
Every kingdom of nature is ruled by a different set of rays which controls the type of evolution which it undergoes. Every kingdom, this is really interesting, every kingdom has 7 types of form and 9 aspects of consciousness. And this goes for the plant, the animal, and the human, and beyond. So there are always 9 initiations or 9 steps of expanding consciousness, even though it starts with the mineral. It shouldn't, of course, because there are kingdoms of elemental essence on the involutionary arc which densify towards the mineral kingdom. But let's start with the mineral. The mineral becomes the plant becomes the animal becomes the human becomes the angel, and the angel becomes the God. This is the Kabbalistic sequence of progression.
So we're going to start with the most fundamental base kingdom, and that's the mineral kingdom. And as a reminder to everybody, the mineral kingdom is actually teeming with life, even though science may say that it's inorganic. Esotericism has long advocated the notion that it's a place of life as well, and that life evolves through different categories of mineral form over vast periods of time, millions of years, and it evolves through the baser elements and like the heavy metals, and it works its way all the way through to what we would call precious elements today, like gold and crystalline structures. And the idea here is that at that level of evolution, it's so rudimentary in this first kingdom that there are 2 fundamental qualities that are trying to be etched into the spark of life at this point. One is the quality of geometric symmetry, and that is evident in crystalline structures. Just look at and it's a marvelous thing to think about a crystal and the mathematics and the geometry of that. And that quality of geometric pattern then is carried forward later into the other kingdoms, so that, for instance, now, we as human beings, we have that same principle of geometric symmetry and design, and it's now far more complex. Just look at the intricacy and the symmetries in our own bodies. But that began through the mineral kingdom when life was trying to develop that rudimentary pattern of symmetry and design. And crystals like a diamond, for instance, could be called the initiate of the mineral kingdom.
There was a time when the human monad manifested through the mineral kingdom. This is called the immetallization of the monad. And that monad manifested through many, many mineral forms. You know, there's only a few at the top and many at the bottom. So you cannot say that one human monad manifests through one atom. It's not that proportion. It's not correct. The mineral kingdom is a kingdom in which the seventh ray principle of exact arrangement is very important. It's the most crystallized kingdom, and it is, except for its vibratory capacity, the vibratory capacity of its atoms, it is struck with immobility. The consciousness of the monad can be said to be asleep in the mineral kingdom. Even though the nature of the consciousness of the mineral kingdom is so remote to us that we cannot fathom it. But some scientists have experimented with subjecting minerals to a process of fatiguing. Even metal fatigue is relevant here. There is a kind of sentiency, a kind of responsiveness, and we find this in the chemical interaction of the atoms. Their very limited consciousness is demonstrated by chemical affinity or chemical repulsion. In terms of the alchemy, the metals are listed somewhat in order. You know, we go from lead to iron to copper to mercury to silver to gold, and I don't know what platinum would be, but there is a hierarchy of development in each one of the divisions. So we have the earthy minerals, we have the metallic minerals, and then we have the gems, the precious stones, who are at the apex of the mineral kingdom. And we could say that the diamond, reflecting the first ray in its whiteness, in its clarity, although there are many different colors of diamonds, of course, but the classical diamond is the peak, the head, the summit of the mineral kingdom. And we have sapphires and emeralds and rubies and topaz and amethysts. Everything is a hierarchy. In every kingdom of nature, there is gradual hierarchical progression, and the great forces of heat, pressure in the earth is causing the evolution of the mineral kingdom, and now man, through artificial processes using the mineral kingdom, is causing the evolution of that kingdom. Now, we might also say every kingdom of nature is evolving, and there are transitional forms between the kingdoms. They are hard to detect.
One of the transitional forms between the mineral and the plant would be something like coral, which is very much has a mineral element to it, a strong mineral element, and we would think at face value that it's mineral, but in fact it's a living plant life.
We might also say that radioactivity, as it is expressed in the mineral kingdom, is the beginning of its transition towards the plant kingdom. And radioactivity does not represent a retrogressive state of minerality. It represents a very advanced state of minerality. Every kingdom has to become radioactive. The members of every kingdom, when they become radioactive, are lining up for transition into the next higher kingdom. Man becomes radioactive in his higher initiations and is ready to enter the kingdom of souls. The animal becomes radioactive and is ready to develop intelligence. The plant becomes radioactive and is ready to develop mobility. And also in the mineral kingdom, it is a bridging method into the next kingdom.
So eventually life moves on. It enters into the second kingdom, the plant kingdom. And in the plant kingdom, there are said to be three fundamental qualities that are trying to be developed. One of those qualities that's being added to life is the quality of magnetic appeal. It's in the plant kingdom where we have a strong pull. There's a magnetic feel to plant life. All we have to do is go into a garden to feel that. It draws us in. And so the first, you might say, the law of attraction starts to become very, very operative as it expresses through life in the plant kingdom. The second is the quality of harmonization. And it's not surprising that we see that manifest as beauty. And the harmony that manifests through the plant kingdom in ecosystems is just remarkable. And that really starts to take hold in the plant kingdom and then carries on into subsequent kingdoms. The third quality that arises through the plant kingdom or is being developed in the plant kingdom is what I often call upward yearning. It's the urge of the plant to reach for the sun, the source of life. And that is a very important quality that carries on later. And in the human kingdom, it's far more developed. And now it's not about reaching for the physical sun, but it's about inward reaching toward the sun that is the soul itself. We are all mystically, or potentially, we evolve to the place where we mystically reach for the inner sun. But that actually took root, no pun intended, but it took root when life was evolving for us in the plant kingdom.
When we come to the level of the plants, obviously there's a certain very clear sentience, ability to feel that we perceive. The obvious ones are the way in which plants have certain attractions that are very clear and very visible to us. The roots, there's a certain sort of intelligence in a plant that a root will seek out and find water. Same sort of thing we witness in the harmonious combination of plants that we find in gardens. Also, we find that plants, as they relate to human beings, have healing properties, have damaging properties, that there's certain vibratory quality, and the way that they interact with other life forms is, again, something that pictures the fact that this is one chain that is interconnected, that all life forms share in their participation in the life form of others.
The plant kingdom, or vegetable kingdom, is the most advanced kingdom on our planet, relatively speaking. It's the only kingdom that is subject to 3 rays, 2, 4, and 6, and the planet Venus is very, very important. And through that planet Venus, our relationship with the plant kingdom is going to help us open up our soul. Man has been called the Saptaparna, or the sevenfold plant, and we also unfold just the way the plant does. The unfolding of our consciousness is plant-like. This is the kingdom that is meant to nourish us. Suffice it to say, if we can cultivate the plants in all of their grades and develop a very good relationship to them, the type of nourishment for us which will bring us into soul consciousness is imminent, is close.
So another thing to think about with regard to the plant kingdom, as well as all kingdoms, is they too are hierarchical, and that life works its way through categories of plant life, just as life worked itself through the lower, more base substances in the mineral kingdom all the way to the precious elements. The same is true with the plant kingdom. It begins evolving through the very most basic, probably things like algae, and it works its way up through different categories of plant life, leading to its highest expression, which is in the form of things like beautiful flowers, the majestic redwoods of the forest. So in a certain sense, we could say that a flower represents the initiate of the plant kingdom, or is an example of an initiate of the plant kingdom. And its soulful quality is said to be the quality of fragrance itself, and that represents its soul emanation. There are thought to be transitional forms that move from one kingdom to the next. You've got plants that are carnivorous or showing indications of carnivorous tendencies, like a Venus flytrap, which is sort of the beginnings of a movement from the plant kingdom to the animal kingdom.
Our insistence on heavy meat eating is causing the defoliation of our planet. So the denudation of the plant life of the planet is destroying the oxygen level on our planet. We can see the symbiotic relationship. The carbon dioxide is breathed in by the green plants, and in the photosynthesis process, we have the exhalation of oxygen, which is precisely what man needs to become more and more of a soul. If hydrogen is the spirit, oxygen is the soul. There are so many correspondences between the periodic table of elements and the different stages through which the different kingdoms pass in their initiatory cycle. We have to relate to the plants as if they are our source of nourishment and establish an entirely new and harmonized relationship with the animal kingdom, which does not exist. Well, and probably we will be speaking of the animal kingdom.
So then life eventually moves into the animal kingdom full force, and it works its way up through different categories of animal life, from the most simplest forms all the way to the very complex and into the domesticated animal forms. There are fundamentally two qualities that are trying to be developed when life evolves through the animal kingdom. The first is instinctual mind, and what we would typically consider animal instinct is a key attribute or quality that life is developing and etching into its nature through the animal kingdom. The second feature that is important to understand in the animal kingdom is the principle of developing devotion to greater life. We see this when we watch animals and the capacity of an animal to parent its offspring. But we also see it in the tendency of domesticated animals particularly to become devoted to the human being that is their master. So your pet dog, your pet cat are good examples of animals that are demonstrating a kind of devotion to greater life. And that quality then carries on later, and that leads to human devotion to greater life called God.
When we come to the animal kingdom, we have mobility added to sentiency. And the animal kingdom is developing the power of mind through movement. Its rays are the third ray of activity and the sixth ray of emotional response. Now, there's such a wide variety of animals, all the way from those who are very inert to those who are almost human beings. When you get into the animal kingdom, the domesticated animals, the elephant, the cat, the dog, the horse, maybe the maybe the dolphin, even now, are considered transitional forms on their way to individualization, on their way to self-awareness. So there are ways to enter the fourth kingdom, but first we have to do our job. Educate the animals so they serve. Now, many animals do serve. The horse serves in the field, the horse serves in war, the dog serves in so many ways. The cat catches mice and prevents disease. Baba Ram Dass, didn't he have a book about how the dolphins help? Can I be of service? A drowning man finding himself buoyed up by a dolphin and saved and so forth. There are many ways that there is sufficient intelligence in these animals to serve. So we have not to eat the animals, we have to educate the animals. They both begin with an E. To eat or to educate, which will it be? Most animals will have to wait until the next round in order to become human. Some few can in this round, some few special cases. When the animal that has substantiality, it has sentiency, it has mobility, reaches a point of self-reflection, when its consciousness is no longer simply outgoing, but the power of the planet Venus is introduced, which holds up to its consciousness a kind of mirror. Interesting, Venus is even shaped like the mirror. It's called reflective consciousness, and it focuses the outgoing consciousness back upon its own source. That outgoing consciousness begins to realize that there is a center, which is always the same, a center of selfhood. And this is the prelude to making the human or fourth kingdom.
But let's talk a little bit about life now in the human kingdom. It's so interesting because one of the most fundamental qualities of life as it evolves through the human kingdom is the development of individualized consciousness, the capacity to think independent of herd consciousness. The animal kingdom is largely instinctual, and that was a good foundation for life. It needed to develop instinctual consciousness. But out of that comes the human experience where an individualized orientation begins to take place. There's a variety of reasons why that occurs, and we will undoubtedly be talking about that in the future. But the key is to understand that as life begins to individualize, an individual human being begins to think independent of the collective consciousness of the human kingdom. We can say no to something even though the society says yes to something. We can think independently. And that is one of the major features that for millions of years is trying to be developed as life evolves through the human domain. The other key feature in the human kingdom is the capacity to introspect. You see, it's in the human kingdom where life for the first time begins to become aware of awareness, the capacity to look inside and reflect on actions and reflect in time. It's in the human kingdom where we can end the day and we can say to ourselves, how would I do the day differently? A giraffe can't do that. A giraffe can't end the day and say, how would I do it differently? It's simply going to live the nature of giraffeness at the moment. But in the human kingdom, this reflective, introspective capacity begins to truly emerge.
Humanity is a peculiar mixture, and at different points of soul growth. All humans are one with the human oversoul, yet in time and space, through their personality instrumentation, they have varying degrees of experience, and therefore different levels of development and integration. In this cycle, it has created an interesting but challenging expression of human dynamics here on Earth. It can be likened to kindergarten, middle school, and high school all mixed together in the same playground. Yet we must remember that for the soul, all life is but a school while moving from one class to the next, striving to graduate into the next grade. And therefore, one would not teach algebra until a student has already learned basic arithmetic. This is also true when teaching any degree of spiritual education or esoteric knowledge.
So within this greater structure of the solar system, of the planetary scheme, of the planetary chain, of the globes within the chains and schemes, we have the 7 root races that unfold over a globe period. A root race is a planned unfoldment of consciousness, where a certain archetype is created and various civilizations unfold within that particular time period of a root race, which of course encapsulates 7 sub-races and 7 branched races within each sub-race, giving many, many different incarnations and possibilities of civilizations, and of course all the soul groupings, the 7 ray soul groupings who incarnate through those particular branched races and sub-races and root races to gain experience, and of course all aim towards enlightenment and liberation ultimately.
Seven root races will manifest upon the earth during each round, and the 7 root races of each round will overlap one another as each race gives birth to the next. It is important to note that all races are cyclical, not linear, nor is there a definitive line where one begins and another ends.
The root races, just like cycles, overlap each other. A cycle just does not finish and then starts in a linear track. Cycles are more spiralic in their nature. And so the root races can be seen like this as well. They don't just finish and then start again. They overlap each other. A good way to visualize any root race is to see it as a tree, as a big oak tree, for instance. And so we see the main trunk as being the main root race, as the name implies, root race. We see the branches, the main branches that come off that trunk, as being the sub-races of that main root race. And then we see the branches that come off the branches, the smaller branches, as being the branch races. So we have branch race, sub-race, and root race, symbolized in the tree. And then when we look at the leaves on the small branches of the tree, we can see these as the nations that come into incarnation, and they have their cycles of around about 3,000 to 4,000 years in duration. And so we have the rise and fall of civilizations, as we have the rise and fall of root races.
What you sow, according to the ageless wisdom, the rays of our kingdom, the 4th ray and the 5th ray. The 4th ray of conflict. We are the 4th kingdom in nature, and we're always fighting with each other, trying to achieve harmony and love. And the 5th ray of concrete science and factual perception.
So the human being, again, is one who has this quality of self-reflection, self-awareness. And it places a whole new level of responsibility, that now we begin to actually choose to advance this evolutionary process. That up until now, up until we reach the human kingdom, the motivating factor in our unfoldment has been what's described as natural impulse. That basically we are impelled by the forces that react upon us and to which we react. The very different quality of humanity is that now we have the capacity to respond, to choose.
We are the bridging kingdom. Humanity is the bridging kingdom and is the macrocosm to all the lower kingdoms, and the point of expression through which the 3 higher kingdoms can manifest: the kingdom of souls, of planetary lives, and even one day of solar lives. We human beings We're supposed to receive the expression of the higher kingdoms and then turn what we receive, plus our intelligence, toward the elevation and the proper utilization of the lower kingdoms. We are the intermediate kingdom. What is our purpose on the planet? If we manage to express that purpose and not fall short, because that could happen as well, we have to be the harmonizing bridge between the higher worlds and the lower worlds. We have to create, instead of conflict and exploitation and misuse, we have to create on our planet a harmony between the lower kingdoms and a right respect and receptivity and acknowledgement of the higher kingdoms so we can embody them. We have to become souls. That's the purpose of the fourth kingdom. First to evolve intelligence, then a degree of love and harmony, and then, through the application of sacrificial will, to become a true soul. That is the opportunity that is offered to the fourth kingdom now, entry into the fifth.
The next kingdom after the human kingdom is called the kingdom of the soul itself. And the kingdom of the soul is what we're all trying to move into. And indeed, the latter part of the human experience, from the awakening to the full entrance into the fifth kingdom, is what we would call the spiritual path. And in that process, there are incremental steps called initiation that finally bring you into full entrance into that kingdom. Now, it's interesting because each of us have a soul, and we are each, therefore, members of the fifth kingdom in a way, inasmuch as we are told that the soul itself is evolving, and that though it is in the fifth kingdom, it's said to be probationary. What I mean by that is, for full entrance into the fifth kingdom, it requires that the soul be able to express itself through the personality, the lower self, and do it unencumbered, without distortion. And when the soul can do that all the time without that distortion, that represents full entrance into the fifth kingdom of nature. And in a way, that's what the path is. The path is consciously oriented around facilitating that process. So, when you're on the path, as again how we would define that in this philosophy, you are actually at the tail end of a long journey through one kingdom of nature, and you're beginning the great transition from the fourth kingdom to the fifth kingdom, and there are several lives that are required to complete that. But it is what the path really is, transition from the fourth to the fifth kingdom of nature. And the soul, its consciousness, its attributes have so much to do with taking us away from our preoccupation now with our individualness and opening us up to a recognition that even though we have the note of individuality within us, it's trying to widen us into a recognition that each of us is merely a cell within a greater life. And that's a really important concept, because all of this is about the Logos. Now recall, the Logos is the entity that ensouls the whole planet. And all kingdoms of nature represent sparks of life from the Logos as it tries to evolve itself through those kingdoms of nature. And so the kingdom of the soul is one step in a 7-step process, you might say. It's the fifth kingdom. There's a sixth kingdom and a seventh kingdom. The sixth kingdom is called the planetary kingdom, and the seventh kingdom is called the solar kingdom. So all of this is just a larger entity that's evolving itself through form, and that you and I are simply constituent parts of its evolution as it works its way through that journey through 7 kingdoms of nature.
The kingdom of souls, which is the fifth kingdom, ruled by the fifth ray and the second ray of love wisdom, and above that, the kingdom of planetary spirits or planetary lives. And when we human beings become an initiate of the 6th degree, we begin to enter that kingdom of planetary lives.
At a certain point, our awareness starts to expand, and we become aware that this life that we live is connected to a much greater life. That life has been called many things, but certainly a great aspect of that is the life of this planet, within which we live, we move, we have our being, as it's expressed in scriptural writings. Generally, when they talk about the path that leads to this, it always involves the experience of love. So love in its highest sort of expression, which is the love that finds a unity, the love that perceives the links between all kingdoms of nature. And that in the capacity, as we develop this capacity, that it's something which has a transformative effect. It's something that moves us beyond just animal desire, moves us beyond just emotion, moves us beyond mere thought. This is really the process of becoming linked and rooted in this Buddhic nature and beyond. And this is what has been expressed by the great teachers that have come, and the possibility that is said lies before us. This greater consciousness, just as we in our bodies utilize fingers, hands, feet, tongue, eyes to express the consciousness that is working through it, in the same way, this greater consciousness utilizes all of these kingdoms of nature to express its own life, and we're all involved in the process of the unfoldment of that life. It's a group effort in many ways. And to the extent that we're able to actually understand it, we become able to participate in this process.
The idea that the Logos is evolving through the kingdoms of nature is so important to understand in this philosophy, but also understand that kingdoms of nature in many ways represent chakra outlets for that greater entity. You know, it is said that the entire human kingdom, in its totality, the sum total of all human consciousness, is the throat vibration, the throat chakra to the planetary Logos.
The Earth is a living being. Like any living being, it has various organs in its energy system. The kingdoms of nature are like chakras in the energy system of the Earth. The kingdom of planetary lives has much to do with the head center, head chakra of our planet. The kingdom of souls, much to do with the heart chakra of our planet. And humanity itself, much to do with the throat or intelligence center of our planet. And some of the higher types of human beings, such as members of the new group of world servers, have to do with the ajna center of our planet. And then we go on down and we find the Deva kingdom representing the sacral center of our planet, and the mineral kingdom having much to do with the base of the spine of our planet, and the animal kingdom, the solar plexus, and the plants, the vitality of our planet. There's a certain splenic connection with the plant kingdom providing so much solar vitality. So every kingdom of nature is really an organ in this living being we call our planet. Now we can expand the idea to all the different mansions that are within our planetary scheme, and there are many. But we can get the idea that these great aggregations of monads working through what we call the various kingdoms are actually functional organs in the great God we call our planetary Logos as he manifests through our particular little planet, the Earth. When it comes to the kingdom of planetary lives, which begins at Chohanship, which is a little higher than a master, we have again the third ray and the sixth ray operative. And beyond that, and really at the crown, is the kingdom of solar lives, whose rays are very much like the mineral kingdom, the first and the seventh, though I suspect in reverse order.
I am the soul. I am the light divine. I am love. I am will. I am fixed design. O thou who givest sustenance to the universe, from whom all things proceed, and to whom all things return, unveil to us the face of the true spiritual sun, hidden by a disk of golden light, that we may know the truth and do our whole duty until we journey to thy sacred feet. I am the soul. I am the light divine. I am love. I am will. I am fixed design.
So always with this philosophy, as you understand it more fully, there's a process of understanding that there is your development, and then it's also a recognition that you are a component part of a larger thing that's in development, and on it goes. It's all part of the hylozoistic principle that has been discussed already.
In hylozoism, everything's alive. There's nothing without soul. The scientist of today thinks that matter is inanimate, that it's not alive, it's a dead thing. But occultism, spiritual occultism, does not allow that perspective. Our planet is a living being. Every planet is a living being. Our sun is a living being. And the constellations of stars, those stars are like chakras in this great living being.
All throughout the world, there are cultures and religions who have focused on what has been called worship of the sun. Really, at its deepest level, is not the worship of an orb in the sky, but the great consciousness that this orb is, in essence, the body of. So this great consciousness that makes life possible on Earth, that makes life possible on all of the other planets, around which all of these planets revolve, is really the sort of center of this phase of development, this very extended phase of development, that all of the kingdoms of nature, the human family, and the planetary life, we find ourselves participating in that at this particular moment.
Currently, in this cycle of time and space, we are in the latter half of the 5th root race of the 4th round in the 4th globe of the 4th chain. In other words, about halfway through the entire planetary scheme. The solar system as a whole is also said to be about halfway through its development, but on an even grander scale, spanning trillions of years, when including both objective and subjective duration, which the science of cycles accounts for.
So Master Moria told us in his wonderful little book of daring that there was the disciple who looked up at the stars, and instead of, having this awe-struck, mute response, he said, "Hail, brothers." And in that moment of daring, his ego disappeared. That's what Moria says. Treat the great lives as your brothers, and your limited ego will disappear through cosmic co-measurement. In trying to combine things like this, I'm trying to use the principle of pure reason, which is a method of intuitive association, gathering things together in related and archetypal forms.
Another way to understand the evolution of life through the kingdoms of nature can be understood from a dimensions point of view. You know, it is said that when life, the pure spark of beingness, before it even began its journey through the kingdoms of nature, it existed in an utter state of naivety, but a complete relatingness to the whole, the oneness of all things. But it had no intelligence, it had no development purpose, it had no sense of love. It was blissfully naive. By analogy, it's equivalent to what Piaget speaks of in the developmental theory of an infant. You know, his research showed that a baby, when it's first born, it cannot distinguish itself from its environment. From the baby's perspective, it is all that it perceives. In a certain sense, by analogy, that's exactly what pure spirit experiences before its long evolutionary journey through the kingdoms of nature. But then that spark of life is forced into to plummet into the lowest kingdom of nature and begin the long journey of evolution through the kingdoms of nature. And what forces it is that the Logos itself is incarnating. And so because the spark of life is only a constituent part of a larger entity that's evolving through form, it has no choice. It is forced to incarnate. And so we can look at this as dimensional realization as well. Before the monad or the pure spark of being is incarnate, it's lost in the naivety of oneness and blissful oneness. But it is everywhere, or its perception is allness. By forcing it into the mineral kingdom, it's now somewhere. It went from everywhereness to somewhereness. It's like the circle becomes the point, and the point defines a dimension. There's the sense of locality. Then in each kingdom of nature, a new dimensional perception arises. So for instance, in the next kingdom, the plant kingdom, a dimension of verticality starts to arise. Life evolves to the point where it can start reaching for the sun and also plummeting into the rootedness of the earth, and so a dimensional orientation is starting to take place, a new dimension. Then as life enters into the animal kingdom, another dimension arises, and that's what we would call horizontal participation in life, and we get the sense of mobility. The animal is no longer fixed in a rooted place, it can move horizontally, which suggests that a whole new dimension of life is realized through form. And then when it enters into the human kingdom, then we have the introspective dimension, the dimension of internalizing the life. So even though we often think that we are three-dimensional creatures, the truth is we're much more four-dimensional creatures because we have the three dimensions that we perceive in life, but we also have the internal dimension, the realization of introspective analysis. That's a dimension as well. And so that's what life looks like as you go through the four kingdoms. And in the fifth kingdom, you have another dimension that brings us into a realization of what we would call an intuitive degree of realization, intuitive dimension of awareness, and on it goes. So I just wanted to highlight that we could see this whole journey as not just developing certain psychological attributes, but also perceptual dimensional awareness.
When we talk about a soul coming into incarnation, we can view it as being upon the involutionary arc, coming down into matter, having experience in matter over many, many thousands of lifetimes, and then gradually embarking upon the evolutionary arc, which takes it out of matter towards spirit. So involution and evolution are two inextricably entwined terms that have to do with the spiritualizing of matter, essentially, coming down into matter and redeeming that matter and raising it up, and then working towards the path of liberation.
What is important now is that man is changing kingdoms. This fourth kingdom of nature is in the process of a great transformation, and certain millions of its members are on the cusp of entering the kingdom of souls. And this they do through esoteric training, through meditation, through service. It may take some thousands of years for many people to make this transition, but for right now, through meditation, through deep perception, through love, through kindness, through inclusiveness, through group function, the doors to the kingdom of souls is open to us, even while the door to the human kingdom is mostly closed even to the intelligent animals. So a great step forward in terms of change of kingdom is possible for quite a number of human beings, and this will be precipitated by the reappearance of the Bodhisattva, the great Lord, the head of the hierarchy, Lord Maitreya, the Christ. I should say that if the diamond is the peak or summit of the mineral kingdom, in all of its sevenfold varieties, just as stars are of 7 colors, then the rose, maybe the red rose, but of course there are all these different colors. The rose is the peak of the plant kingdom. This is all interestingly connected because the real rose of humanity is the Christ, who is in a sense a Venusian being, and Venus rules that entire kingdom. The greatest expression of Venus is the rose. So we have this equivalence between the second ray, Venus, the rose, and the Christ.